Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name's Thomas, back with another player review today, getting towards the end of the list now. Obviously come from the 2019 to 2020 season, which felt like it went on forever. New season kind of almost just around the corner now, but we're going to get through the end of these player reviews. And today, joined by Terry McAllister, obviously of the Toffee Blues, and David from the County Road Bobblers Podcast. First player review we're going to start off with today is Fabian Delph, a player that came on a low fee, looked like almost a no-brainer at the start. You know, he's meant to have experience. It wasn't a lot of money. But obviously, they're my first impression of the deal. Over to Terry first. What were your kind of first impressions? Did you expect it to be a good signing? Because obviously, the original fee was only something like 8 million or something, so it didn't seem like a bad deal. But kind of, what were your first impressions?
I was happy with it. When I first heard it, it was obviously not an overwhelming signing. It was, very much a squad signing. But, it reminded me of like when we signed Naismith, players like that. They're not going to, go straight into your team. They're not going to change the way you play or anything like that. But they're going to be a useful squad addition who brings a little bit of, nous, a little bit of experience. And in Delph's case, we hoped a little bit of leadership to the team. I think, like was mentioned a lot at the time, people, it's not a lot of the Man City documentary where they won the league hadn't been out for that long. It'd been out for like 9 months, 10 months when we were in forums. That was fresh in everyone's mind. There was like a clip of him in it, and I remember everyone on Twitter and what have you going, "Oh, well, he looked like a proper leader in the documentary." So maybe we could do with a bit of that. Plus, the main thing for me was the price. Like in the Premier League, for most clubs, is maybe not all, but 8 million. It's pretty much risk free. You bring someone in, and if they don't work out, then you're going to make, most of that money back if you move them on somewhere. So say Delph was to go this summer, and we might not get 8 million back for him, but we probably get 5 or something like that. And if there hadn't been, the effects of COVID and whatever, it might have even been, getting our money back. So my first impression was fine. I was like, right, nuts and bolts player, goes in, adds a little something to the squad. He can supplement some of the other players we're bringing in from abroad, like, Kabaman and Moise Keane and what have you. He doesn't need a bedding in period. So I was happy with it. I wasn't, dancing in the streets, but I thought sensible buy. See how he does, and then we certainly did see how he did.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people kind of had that initial reaction. It wasn't setting the world alight. It wasn't like a world beater we were signing, but it was meant to be a solid signing. As we know, it hasn't really worked out since then. Kind of coming over to you, David. What's been your kind of general impression of Delph this season? Obviously, when he hasn't been injured, when he was on the pitch, kind of, what were your opinions of him?
He's one of them players where if the side's playing well, you don't really notice him as much. He does the Lee Carsley almost. He does all the the mopping up, the work. I like to call it the Gabaman effect almost. What we couldn't have anticipated is it's almost like a domino effect. Gabaman getting injured. And that shifted a lot of the reliance on the players that we had. And all of a sudden, Fabian Delph came into the forefront and had to be relied on. Now, if we knew Gabaman was going to be injured, I don't think maybe Delph would have ever been the target because of his injury record over the last couple of years. But, when you actually look at his numbers aren't that bad. He passes reasonably well. He gets about the pitch, his pressure on the ball. Certainly, if you look back to 14-15, it was a particularly good season for him. Obviously, Gareth Southgate thinks highly of him, as Terry mentioned before, about his leadership. He was allowed to fly home from England duties while his wife gave birth and then fly back, which was unheard of in major competitions for England. But Southgate allowed it on this particular occasion with Delph because he felt he brought something to the dressing room. So there's a couple of managers there that really think highly of his leadership ability. But as I say, the Gabaman effect almost that had a knock on him. And I don't think really. I say momentum's everything in football. I don't ever think he's got that momentum at Everton, and as a result, he's just sometimes if you lose the crowd, all that the issues he had in January of Instagram and all that kind of stuff, it's hard to get them back. And it's a bit, it might just be a bit of bad luck. Who knows? But yeah, it's a bit of a. It looks like a strange signing now. Did it then? Probably not. But as we've seen, he can't be relied on. But the other side of it, if we do improve next season, he can play multiple positions. We haven't got a backup now, but Baines is gone. He can play left back. There's plenty to think about with him. But if the offer comes in, I'm sure we'll be considering it.
Yeah, I completely agree on most of those points. To be fair, have you got anything to add, Terry? Generally, just about his performance this year.
Not to add, but I think that's a great point to the Gbamin effect. I think what that injury did, specifically to Delph, was Delph went from being the sort of replacement for McCarthy to the replacement for Gay, and he wasn't, up to that. Like he if he'd have replaced McCarthy's role in the squad, he'd have been a supplementary midfielder who comes in, can't be put in non-stop because his body's not up to it, but he'll come in and he'll play 5 games here, and then he'll have 10 games out on the bench or what have you, and he'd come in as and when. Whereas when Gbamin got a long-term injury, Delph suddenly became, he's the only defensive-minded midfielder in the squad, and as we saw after the lockdown, none of the others are up to it at all. I think as bad as Delph's been, and he has been bad, which we'll go on to in more detail now, but he would have been better than probably any of the other 3 in the centre midfield after the lockdown, just because he's a little bit more experienced in a holding position. But yeah, that Gbamin injury, it affected the whole season, didn't it? I mean, there's something to be said. Well, if one injury to a midfielder can do that, maybe the other signing shouldn't have been Delph. Maybe the other signing should have been someone who was a little bit more up to the defensive side of things or the physical demands of that many games. But his season has been massively affected by an injury from another player, and that's so I think if he plays next season, if Carlo likes and wants to keep him, you might see an improvement from him. I don't know whether he'll get the chance. As you said, if an offer comes in, I don't think we'll be turning any offers down. But he might be better next season with a different, set of circumstances and a different, environment in the squad as a whole. Yeah,
definitely. He was clearly brought in to kind of be that cool head in the midfield, obviously to kind of bed in Gbamin, as you both kind of touched on. He knows the Premier League well. He's been around for a very long time now. But obviously, and I'm going to bring this game up. I'm going to go straight to Terry here because me and Terry have spoken about this before. One of the low points I feel of the season, that Newcastle game at Goodison Park. He was brought in as the cool head, get on the ball, relax things. It's all got a bit crazy in the last couple of minutes. All you need to do is hold on to the ball. I'm going to go to Terry here. Kind of, what was your reaction from that Newcastle kind of moment in the last minute, and how telling was that kind of about the player that Delph's kind of been all season now?
I personally was done with him after that because all the things we've said, like what he was meant to be brought in for, he actually has done the opposite. The circumstances notwithstanding, with Gbamin and what have you, he hasn't lived up to his end of the bargain either, let's be honest. He was brought in to be the experienced, calm, head in the team. And, he's got a team around him with a lot of young players. You've got Moise Keane, Richarlison, Calvert-Lewin, Holgate. And he's the one, Delph as being one of the most experienced and probably the most decorated, or if not one of the most decorated in the squad. He's the one who's replying to fans on social media when they're angry after a derby, embarrassing defeat. He's the one who's getting himself sent off in away games for tackling when there's not none against Watford. Players running down a blind alley and he gets himself sent off or you're already on a yellow. He's the one who you've only got 10 seconds to keep the ball and you'll win the game against Newcastle, and he punts it about 50 feet in the air, about 2 yards away from him. He's the one who's going with his wrong foot, defending a set piece against Bournemouth away. It's just, how can he be? He's gone the complete opposite way for what he was meant to be doing. You could forgive a young player for making mistakes and doing ill-advised things that Delph's been doing, but not Delph. He's actually been the polar opposite of what he was brought in for. So it hasn't worked out for that reason. He had things against him, like we've said, with these circumstances and the amount of games he's had to play, but he hasn't helped himself either.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I kind of touched on the social media thing. For me, that was when I was really disappointed with him. First of all, I want to say I don't advocate, hurling abuse at players on Instagram. I don't see where that gets anyone. It was a pointless thing to do, and I don't say we should do it, but he absolutely shouldn't have replied. He's still a professional footballer at the end of the day. And he also, the way he replied, I don't know about you two, but in my opinion, he just seemed quite arrogant. He seemed like he was part of a winning side that had a poor game. That game was kind of the epitome of the whole season. He wasn't playing well. team wasn't playing well, and he kind of came back. Like, I can't even remember what he said. And obviously there was a moment with Holgate when he asked to show him some respect or something. He just had, for me, he just has a certain arrogance about him. So he's come from City, he's won titles, but now he's come to Goodison Park. He doesn't have the titles next to him. He's not next to winners. And kind of when it's been kind of like when he's been exposed almost on the pitch, he can't hide really. I mean, especially now in our ridiculously weak midfield. But obviously Terry's kind of mentioned a couple of moments where he'd kind of lost faith in Delph. Are there any that kind of stand out to you, David, about where you maybe lost faith in him at some point this season?
I mean, I think, again, it's hard to actually... I always say, what are the players' highlights? And it's hard to actually think back and think if there are any. And I've talked constantly on the podcast we do about us having too many sixes one week and not enough, and maybe an eight the next week, and not enough sevens. We don't have continually consistent players. You know, Iwobi's a prime example. He might play really well one week, and some will say he doesn't at all, but he may have a particularly good game for him, and then he'd be 5 or 6, for the next 2-3 games. Delph can't actually, his highlight of the season, you can't actually think back of them. I actually spoke to Greg O'Keefe back in January about that social media incident, and gave him a bit of a discussion that went in the Athletic. And at that time, I remember saying to Greg, I just think he's been really unlucky with injuries, but he just hasn't done anything since. He's done nothing to inspire us. He's done nothing to show us that we should stick with him. The only highlight I can remember is the Arsenal away, the 3-2 defeat. He probably played all right that game, but bar that, I can't think of any highlight for him that I can think back, and that says it all really for an Everton player.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of moving on, I mean, we could talk honestly about how much of a disappointing signing he has been this season. Obviously, we're in the window now. We've mentioned, obviously, if the club get an offer for him, they might take it. Kind of starting with Terry, what would you kind of just do with him next? Are you kind of looking to actively move him on? Are you keeping him around until an offer comes, or are you just kind of, he might be and we've spoken about this with Gylfi Sigurdsson in the past, to be fair. He's rubbish on the pitch, but Ancelotti clearly likes him as a leader in the dressing room. He keeps giving him the captain's armband. We clearly don't see half of what goes on at the club. So what would you kind of do with him next, Terry?
I don't think he's one of those, if it's made a list of the players who the club need to get out, he's definitely on it, but he's not at the top. There's other players, who are, like, Balassi and Besic and Sandro, players who aren't contributing anything but they're taking money out. Then you've got, for me, the Sigurdssons and I was going to say Schneiderlin then, but he's gone. But the Sigurdssons, who are taking significant money and absolutely awful. But then you're probably arriving at Delph. So Delph's one of them. I'd like to see him moved on, but I'm realistic about the chances of us moving him on. He's getting linked with Leeds. Are people serious? Have you watched Leeds recently? He'd absolutely fall apart and playing their way. It's like the most high intensity, high work rate style going, and Bielsa's not going to have a player who's made of cardboard, glass, whatever. Like, I don't know. I think he's going to be one of them where he'll have enough uses that will keep him around for the. He's only. Did he sign a 3-year contract? I think it was a 3-year. I'm not 100. It was a David. Yeah. So I think barring an unexpected bid, I think we'll keep him around and use him as a utility player for the rest of his contracts. That's this season and next season, and then we'll probably just let him go. But I wouldn't be expecting him to start many games next season, providing Gabama can come back from the injury and stay fit this time. I think he'll be the fourth choice midfielder if that. If that happens, that's not even including any new players who come in.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can personally see him sticking around purely because, and some people might not like it, but at the end of the day, we have no depth at left back. We can't afford to just stick on Cuckoo. He wasn't even ready for Ligue 1. I mean, people who know the French league a lot better than me said, a lot of raw talent, but he wasn't ready to make the step up to the first team. So he's definitely not ready to make the step up here. And there's no point in, throwing him in. I mean, to be fair to Luca Dini, doesn't get many injuries that I can really think of. He hasn't really spent that much time injured while he's been here. But at the end of the day, if the club are looking at, money might be a bit tighter than usual, FFP, can we really be affording to go and spend the money on a left back? Probably not. There's much more pressing matters kind of elsewhere in the squad. But I am slightly concerned about Fabian Delph in a 4-4-2 kind of system because, I mean, we've seen with players like Gomez who they might have technical ability. Are they like workhorses? Absolutely not. Do they have a lot of energy? No, and they've been exposed recently. So I think if we keep him around, he will be used more predominantly as a backup left back more than anything, because we are clearly looking to recruit in central midfield, and we won't want just an abundance of players in central midfield. Yeah, we can keep hiring better ones, but if you've still got the old ones kind of hanging about, you're going to have to start shifting them eventually. So I can see him staying. David, what are your opinions on it?
I agree with most of the points that have been made. He will get probably kept just because of his ability to play in numerous positions. Obviously, when we're under pressure as well, you could potentially play him on the left in a 4-4-2 as a left midfielder as well. So they may take in a more attacking player off in the last 10 minutes. We know Carlo likes to close games down, and they can double up on that left-hand side as well. But I think purely because of the FFP reasons, probably only going to be signing 3 players. And as Terry alluded to, he's probably one of there's players above him that we need to shift first. Even he's like many though. He can tick a lot of them off. If a substantial bid comes in, 100% accept it. But is it likely? Probably not. So for that reason alone, I'd say he's staying.
Yeah, I agree. And then kind of just to round off the video as we always do, Terry, your rating out of 10 for Delph this season?
2 out of 10. 2.
David?
Yeah, I can't disagree. It's not anything over 5. He's done nothing really. It's not good enough for a football player.
I'd love if someone goes back to all the player reviews and we get an average of what Terry's given the players this season. I can't see it being above an average of 5, but perfectly reasonable to be fair. I'd probably give him like a 3. Poor all season. He didn't look. I mean, I understand. He was kind of thrust into a role that he wasn't meant for, as Terry said. Kind of, he almost had to replace Gay at some point, which he clearly was never the midfielder for. But to be fair, what he was meant to do, leadership, cool head on the ball, he's been none of that, to be fair. But we're going to round it off there anyway. We don't want to dwell on the negatives too much. We do want to look ahead to next season. So thank you all very much for watching. Thank you to Terry and David for coming on. Our next player review will be on Mason Holgate, so a much brighter spark. So be sure to check that out on the channel as well. Check out David's social media in the description, Terry's, mine, and of course all the Toffee Blues social media. So thank you very much for watching, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues.